The small town of Pinehaven, nestled among the dense forests of northern Michigan, had always been the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. A community where everyone knew each other's names, histories, and secrets, or so they thought. But in the harsh winter of 1987, this quiet logging town would become synonymous with one of the most baffling disappearances in American history, a case that would remain unsolved for nearly 4 decades. The Pinehaven High School wrestling team was the pride of the community. Led by Coach Thomas Harmon, the team had defied all expectations, qualifying for the state championships despite competing against schools 3 times their size. On the morning of February 12, 1987, the team, consisting of 12 boys aged 16 to 18, boarded a yellow school bus with their coach and an assistant coach, bound for the state tournament in Lansing, a journey of approximately 3 hours. They never arrived. Somewhere between the snow-covered roads of Pinehaven and the state capitol, the bus and all 15 people aboard vanished without a trace. No accident report, no distress call, no witnesses, just the haunting absence of 15 souls who seemed to have been swallowed by the wilderness. The 911 call came in at 7:42 p.m. that evening from Patricia Harmon, the coach's wife. The tournament started at 2, she told the dispatcher, her voice trembling. Tom always calls when they arrive. Always. Something's wrong. By midnight, every law enforcement agency in the region had been alerted. By morning, the story had made national headlines: entire high school wrestling team missing. The search that followed would become one of the largest in Michigan history. State police established a command center at Pinehaven High School. The gymnasium where the team had practiced just days earlier became a hub of desperate activity. Maps were spread across wrestling mats. Photographs of the missing boys and their coaches were taped to the walls. Parents huddled together, clutching coffee cups and rosary beads, waiting for any news. The search area was vast and unforgiving. The route from Pinehaven to Lansing cut through miles of dense forest, frozen lakes, and abandoned mining territory. February 1987 had been particularly brutal, with temperatures plunging to 20 below zero and snowfall reaching record levels. Visibility was poor. Conditions were treacherous. Sheriff Walter Denton, a Vietnam veteran who had served as Pinehaven's sheriff for nearly 15 years, led the investigation. "We are looking for 15 people and a 40-foot school bus," he told reporters. "These aren't items that simply disappear." But they had. Helicopters swept over endless white terrain. Search dogs traced the bus's intended route. Volunteers from neighboring counties joined the effort, trudging through snowdrifts and scanning frozen ravines. Nothing was found. No skid marks on the roads, no broken guardrails, no debris. The distinctive yellow bus, emblazoned with Pinehaven High School in bold green letters, had seemingly evaporated. The families of the missing were devastated. In a town of just over 6,000 people, everyone was connected to the tragedy in some way. 12 families had lost sons. 3 women had lost husbands. The high school, which housed grades 9-12, had lost nearly 10% of its male student population. As days turned into weeks with no leads, theories began to circulate. Some believed the bus had plunged into one of the region's deep lakes, the ice hiding any evidence. Others whispered about the team being kidnapped, perhaps by a cult or criminal organization. The more superstitious residents spoke of the Pinehaven curse, referencing a century-old legend about loggers who had disappeared in the same forests. The FBI joined the investigation on February 20th, establishing an additional command post in Lansing. Special Agent Catherine Wells, known for solving several high-profile missing persons cases, was assigned to lead the federal effort. "In most disappearances, we find evidence within the first 72 hours, Wells stated in a press conference. "The lack of physical evidence in this case is unusual." The peculiar absence of evidence extended to other areas. The bus had been equipped with a CB radio, standard for school vehicles in the region. Yet no distress calls had been received. The driver, assistant coach Peter Miller, was described as exceptionally cautious, particularly in winter conditions. The route was straightforward, with few detours possible, and perhaps most puzzling, 15 people and a large vehicle had somehow vanished along a relatively well-traveled road without a single witness. As the investigation continued, authorities began to examine the personal lives of everyone involved, searching for any clue that might explain the disappearance. Coach Harmon, 42, had been with the school for 18 years, transforming a mediocre wrestling program into a powerhouse. He was universally respected, with no known enemies. His assistant Peter Miller, 27, had joined the staff just 2 years prior after competing at the collegiate level. He was engaged to be married that summer. The 12 missing students represented a cross-section of the community. Team captain Michael Lawrence was a senior with a full scholarship to Michigan State. James Kovach, another senior, worked part-time at his immigrant father's auto shop. Sophomore David Wilson was the youngest, having earned his varsity spot through sheer determination despite his small stature. Each boy had a story. Each had a future that now hung in terrible suspension. By March, when the thaw began, hope for finding survivors had diminished considerably. The search shifted from rescue to recovery, focusing on waterways and ravines where the bus might have crashed. Divers explored partially frozen lakes. Ground-penetrating radar was used to examine suspicious terrain. Still, nothing was found. Then, on March 23rd, the first piece of evidence emerged. A fisherman on Lake Crystalline, about 30 miles east of the team's intended route, discovered a green and white Letterman jacket floating near the shore. The name Lawrence was stitched across the back. It belonged to team captain Michael Lawrence. The discovery electrified the investigation. Lake Crystalline was nowhere near where the bus should have been. If the jacket had indeed been in the water since February, how had it not sunk? And why would the team have been so far off course? Sheriff Denton ordered an immediate search of the lake and surrounding area. The jacket was sent to the FBI lab for analysis. What they found only deepened the mystery. Despite appearing to have been in water, the jacket showed minimal decomposition and weathering. More troubling, traces of soil found on the garment didn't match the lake's shoreline composition. It matched nothing in the region. 2 days after the jacket was found, another discovery. A wrestling shoe, size 11, was found in a ditch 5 miles from the lake. It was identified as belonging to James Kovach. Again, forensic analysis raised questions. The shoe showed almost no exposure to the elements, despite supposedly being outside for over a month in harsh winter conditions. By April, the case had taken on an almost mythic quality. National media descended on Pinehaven. A segment on Unsolved Mysteries generated thousands of tips, none substantial. Psychics offered their services, claiming to have visions of the team's whereabouts. Some parents, desperate for answers, accepted their help. Others recoiled at what they perceived as exploitation of their grief. The toll on the community was immense. School enrollment dropped as families moved away, unable to bear the constant reminders. The remaining students walked half-empty hallways. The wrestling room was locked, becoming an unofficial memorial. Rumors of hauntings began when students reported hearing the sounds of practice grunts, whistles, the squeak of shoes on mats coming from behind the locked doors late at night. As the one-year anniversary approached, investigators were no closer to solving the case than they had been on that first night. The scattered evidence, the jacket and shoe, seemed to point to something more complicated than a simple accident. Sheriff Denton, who had barely slept in months, began to consider more extreme possibilities. "We have exhausted every conventional explanation," he confided to Agent Wells. "Whatever happened to those boys and their coaches, it wasn't conventional." The case file continued to grow, filled with dead-end leads and theories. One particular area of interest was the wrestling team's unprecedented success that season. They had defeated several favored opponents, sometimes in ways that seasoned observers found surprising. Was there something unusual about their training methods? Had they discovered something that put them at risk? Former team members who had graduated the previous year were interviewed extensively. Most described Coach Harmon as tough but fair. However, two former wrestlers mentioned a change in the team's practice routine in recent months. They had begun holding occasional late-night sessions in the school's boiler room sessions, not on the official schedule. When questioned, the school janitor confirmed that he'd given Coach Harmon a key to the boiler room the previous November. The coach had explained that he wanted a space where the team could practice without distractions before the championship. The janitor thought nothing of it. Harmon was trusted implicitly. The boiler room was searched thoroughly, but nothing suspicious was found. Yet the mention of secret practices added another layer to the mystery. What had the team been doing in those underground sessions, and was it somehow connected to their disappearance? As months turned into years, the case gradually faded from national attention. But in Pinehaven, time seemed frozen. The families of the missing existed in a terrible limbo, unable to properly mourn without confirmation of death, yet losing hope of reunion with each passing season. The town itself began to decline. The lumber mill, once the primary employer, closed in 1992. Young people left for opportunities elsewhere, many citing the curse as their reason for leaving. By the late 1990s, Pinehaven had become a shadow of its former self, defined by absence and mystery. Sheriff Denton retired in 1995, the case having broken both his health and spirit. In his retirement speech, he made a promise. "I won't stop looking until my last breath. Those boys deserve to come home." He kept his word, continuing to investigate independently until his death from heart failure in the 20th anniversary of the disappearance brought renewed media interest. A documentary filmmaker, Elaine Harrison, began interviewing the families and examining the evidence. Her work uncovered something overlooked in the original investigation: a pattern of strange phone calls received by several team members in the weeks before they vanished. Joyce Wilson, mother of sophomore David Wilson, had kept meticulous diaries during that period. In January 1987, she noted her son receiving late-night calls that left him agitated. When she questioned him, he dismissed them as team business. Similar accounts came from other parents. The calls always came after 11 p.m. The boys never discussed them. The phone records from that period had long since been destroyed, another dead end in a case filled with them. But Harrison's documentary, The Pinehaven 15, raised public awareness and prompted the Michigan State Police to officially reopen the investigation in 2007, 20 years after the disappearance. Detective Laura Reeves, assigned to the cold case, began by re-examining the physical evidence. The Letterman jacket and wrestling shoe had been preserved in the state police evidence locker. Advanced forensic techniques, unavailable in 1987, might reveal new information. The results were perplexing. The soil found on Michael Lawrence's jacket contained mineral compounds that didn't match any documented geological formations in Michigan. The leather of James Kovacs' shoe showed traces of a fungal species typically found only in subterranean environments much further south. Most bizarrely, both items contained microscopic metal particles with unusual properties, particles that metallurgists couldn't readily identify. These results suggest the items were exposed to an environment we haven't identified, Detective Reeves wrote in her report. Either they were transported a considerable distance from where the team disappeared, or they were in a location with very unusual characteristics. The scientific anomalies brought new theories. Some speculated about abandoned mines or underground military facilities in the region. Others pointed to the area's history of geological oddities, including magnetic anomalies that had occasionally disrupted compasses and electronic equipment. In 2010, a potential breakthrough occurred when construction workers expanding a highway near Bridge River, about 50 miles southwest of Pinehaven, uncovered what appeared to be a piece of twisted yellow metal buried several feet underground. Initial examinations suggested it might be a fragment of a school bus. The entire area was cordoned off as archaeologists carefully excavated the site. The metal was indeed from a school bus, but dating techniques revealed it was from a vehicle manufactured in the 1960s, too old to be the Pinehaven bus. The false lead was devastating to the families, who had briefly allowed themselves to hope for closure. As the 30th anniversary approached, only 7 of the original 15 families remained in Pinehaven. The others had relocated, seeking escape from the constant reminders of their loss. The town itself had somewhat stabilized, reinventing itself as a destination for paranormal tourism. Ghost tours included stops at the high school and along the route where the bus had vanished. Many found this commodification of tragedy distasteful, but it brought needed revenue to the struggling community. In 2018, a true crime podcast called Vanished devoted an entire season to the Pinehaven case. The host, investigative journalist Daniel Murphy, spent months in the town, reviewing evidence and conducting interviews. His investigation focused on a detail that had been minimized in earlier accounts: the unusual success of the wrestling team that season. They weren't just winning, Murphy explained in the podcast. They were dominating opponents who should have crushed them. Their conditioning was off the charts. Some of these kids were performing at levels you'd expect from Olympic athletes, not high school wrestlers from a small town. Murphy interviewed Dr. Eleanor Phillips, a sports physiologist who had reviewed footage of the team's matches from that season. What stands out is their endurance, Dr. Phillips noted. In third periods, when most wrestlers are exhausted, these boys seem to gain energy. It's as if they weren't experiencing normal fatigue. The podcast raised uncomfortable questions. Had Coach Harmon been using performance-enhancing substances with his team? If so, was there a connection to their disappearance? Could they have been fleeing potential discovery and punishment? These suspicions cast a shadow over the memory of Coach Harmon, who had been virtually canonized in town memory. Many residents rejected the insinuations outright. Others grudgingly acknowledged that the theory explained certain anomalies, including the secret practices and the team's exceptional moments. Blood samples from routine physicals of team members, stored in the school's medical records, were tested for steroids and other substances. The results were negative, though experts noted that testing from that era was limited in scope. The performance-enhancing drug theory remained neither proven nor disproven. Then, in early 2022, a startling discovery was made. During renovation of Pinehaven High School's aging facilities, workers removed the old wooden lockers in the team's locker room. Behind the locker, assigned to Michael Lawrence, they found something etched into the concrete wall, a crude map with unfamiliar symbols and what appeared to be coordinates. Below it, scratched in jagged letters, "Not what we thought, deeper, can't turn back." Forensic analysis confirmed the etchings had likely been made shortly before the team's disappearance. The handwriting matched samples of Michael Lawrence's work. But what did the message mean? What wasn't what they thought? What was deeper? And what couldn't they turn back from? The discovery reignited public interest in the case. Cryptographers attempted to decipher the symbols on the map. Geologists examined the apparent coordinates. Internet sleuths formed communities dedicated to solving the mystery, analyzing every pixel of photographs showing the etched wall. As 2024 began the 37th anniversary of the disappearance approaching, the mystery of the Pinehaven wrestling team remained unsolved. The families still waiting for answers had aged, their grief calcifying into a permanent condition. Some had died without knowing what happened to their loved ones. But the discovery of Michael Lawrence's hidden message had created a new sense of possibility. Whatever had happened to those 15 people on that winter day in 1987, they had not simply vanished without trace. They had left a clue deliberately hidden, meant to be found. The message suggested intention, awareness. It suggested that at least one of them had anticipated something extraordinary. For Detective Rebecca Hayes, who had inherited the cold case from the now retired Laura Reeves, the message changed everything. "This isn't just about where they went anymore," she explained to the current Pinehaven sheriff. "It's about why." And based on this message, they knew something that made them believe they couldn't turn back. Hayes began re-examining every aspect of the case with fresh eyes. She focused particularly on the weeks leading up to the disappearance, the late-night phone calls, the secret practices, the exceptional performances. She developed a theory that the team had discovered something during their training, something connected to the deeper referenced in Lawrence's message. The breakthrough came when Hayes interviewed Eleanor Milligan, now 92, who had been the school librarian in 1987. Milligan recalled Michael Lawrence spending hours researching local geology in the months before the disappearance. "He was fixated on the old mining systems," Milligan recalled. "Kept asking if I had more detailed maps than what was in our collection." This revelation led Hayes to the historical archives in the county seat. There, she found records of an extensive network of mines that had operated in the region from 1860 to 1920 mines, far more extensive than publicly documented. Some tunnels extended for miles beneath the forests and lakes of the area. Most had been abandoned when they flooded or became structurally unsound. Many were not properly sealed. Could the team have discovered an entrance to these forgotten tunnels? Had they been exploring them in secret, perhaps as an extreme training regimen? The theory would explain their unusual conditioning and endurance. It might also explain their disappearance, if they had become lost or trapped in the unstable underground network. But this explanation didn't account for the bus's disappearance, nor did it explain how the entire team had vanished simultaneously. And what of the strange soil composition found on the recovered items, the metal particles that defied conventional analysis? As Hayes delved deeper, she discovered something else in the archives. Reports from miners in the early 1900s, describing unusual phenomena in the deepest tunnels, magnetic disturbances, unexplained temperature variations, tools that degraded rapidly, animals that refused to enter certain passages. Most disturbing were accounts of disorientation and lost time. Miners would emerge from shifts believing only hours had passed, when in fact they had been underground for days. Some reported vivid hallucination, others never returned at all, their disappearances attributed to tunnel collapses or desertion. The mining company had eventually abandoned the entire operation, citing unfavorable conditions without elaboration. The tunnels were sealed, their entrances hidden by deliberate cave-ins or disguised as natural formations. Within a generation, their existence had faded from public knowledge, preserved only in obscure historical records. As Hayes pieced together the historical accounts, a chilling possibility emerged. What if the Pinehaven wrestling team had discovered one of these forgotten mine entrances? What if their secret training had involved exploring these tunnels, perhaps as a test of courage and endurance? And what if, on that February morning in 1987, they had decided to take their bus to a location connected to these mines rather than to the state tournament? The theory was speculative but compelling. It would explain their deviation from the expected route. It might explain the cryptic message about going deeper and being unable to turn back. But it raised an even more disturbing question. If they had entered the mines that day, why had they never emerged? What had they encountered in those lightless passages that had prevented 15 people from ever returning to the surface? In the early spring of 2024, Hayes assembled a specialized team to investigate the possibility. Using ground-penetrating radar and modern mapping techniques, they began searching for mine entrances in the vicinity of Lake Crystalline, where the Letterman jacket had been found decades earlier. What they discovered would shock even the most hardened investigators and would finally begin to unravel the mystery that had haunted Pinehaven for 37 years. But the truth, if it could be called that, would prove stranger and more disturbing than anyone had imagined. In a forgotten clearing hidden by decades of forest growth, they found what appeared to be the ruins of a small concrete structure. Its walls were unusually thick, reinforced with metal unlike any used in conventional construction. The door, a massive slab of the same unusual metal, was sealed shut, its locking mechanism unlike any the team had encountered. On that door, barely visible beneath years of corrosion, was a familiar symbol, one of the same symbols etched on the mat behind Michael Lawrence's locker. Inside that structure, they would find answers that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the disappearance of the Pinehaven wrestling team. Answers that would finally explain what had been found in that high school locker room after 37 years. Answers that would reveal why 15 people had vanished without a trace on a winter morning in 1987, and where they might have gone. The concrete structure discovered in the forest clearing presented immediate challenges. Its door, a solid slab of unidentifiable metal alloy, resisted conventional entry methods. Thermal imaging revealed no heat signatures inside. Ground-penetrating radar couldn't penetrate the unusually dense walls. For 3 days, experts from various federal agencies examined the structure, debating how to proceed. The decision was made to breach the door on April 17, 2024. Media were kept at a distance. Only essential personnel, including Detective Hayes, 2 FBI agents, a geologist and a military engineer, would be present for the initial entry. The families of the missing were notified of the discovery, but were asked to remain in Pinehaven until more information was available. At 9:37 a.m., after hours of careful work with specialized cutting equipment, the seal was broken. The massive door swung inward with surprising ease, as if perfectly balanced, despite decades of abandonment. A rush of cold, dry air, noticeably different from the humid spring atmosphere outside, escaped from the opening. The team waited as air quality sensors were deployed to ensure the environment was safe to enter. What they found inside defied expectation. The structure wasn't merely an entrance to old mining tunnels. It was an elevator shaft, a perfectly circular concrete tube extending downward into darkness, its depth beyond the range of their initial measurements. The elevator car itself was missing, presumably at the bottom of the shaft. Along the walls, metal tracks and a complex pulley system suggested a sophisticated design far beyond what should have existed in an abandoned mine from the early 20th century. "This is military-grade construction," the engineer observed, examining the mechanisms, "but not any military tech I have ever seen. The metallurgical composition is unusual." More puzzling were the markings on the interior walls, the same cryptic symbols found on Michael Lawrence's hidden map. They appeared to be some form of directional system or warning signs. Despite consulting with linguists and cryptographers, their meaning remained elusive. Most significant was what they found mounted beside the elevator entrance. A sign, its plastic surface yellowed with age, but still legible. Aurora Research Station, Level 1, authorized personnel only. Below this, in smaller text, a division of DARPA, Department of Defense. The discovery shifted the investigation dramatically. What had seemed to be an old mining operation now appeared to be something far more complex. A secret government research facility, apparently operational decades after the mines had officially closed. But why had a high school wrestling team been exploring such a facility? And what connection did it have to their disappearance? Detective Hayes immediately contacted federal authorities, expecting the site to be quickly commandeered by military or intelligence agencies. Instead, she received a puzzling response. After 24 hours of communications with various departments, the Department of Defense claimed to have no record of any Aurora research station in their archives. DARPA similarly denied knowledge of such a facility. Either records had been purged, or the facility had operated outside official channels. In the absence of federal intervention, the investigation continued under Hayes's direction. A specialized team was assembled to explore the elevator shaft safely. Using advanced climbing equipment, they began a careful descent, documenting everything with high-resolution cameras. The shaft extended 317 meters over 1,000 feet straight down into bedrock. At its bottom they found not the expected elevator car, but a horizontal tunnel, its perfectly circular shape suggesting it had been created with technology beyond conventional mining equipment of any era. The tunnel stretched beyond the range of their lights in both directions. The air quality remained surprisingly stable, cool, dry, and oxygen-rich, despite the depth and apparent lack of ventilation systems. Radiation levels were normal. No biological contaminants were detected. It was as if the facility had been preserved in a state of suspended animation. The team chose to explore in the direction that aligned with the path of symbols on Lawrence's map. After approximately 200 meters, the tunnel opened into a large chamber that appeared to be a research laboratory. Though long abandoned, much of the equipment remained intact. Computer terminals designs from the 1980s sat on metal desks. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Glass-fronted storage units contained samples and specimens, their labels faded but still partially legible. Most of these labels included variations of the term Aurora material, followed by classification numbers. The specimens themselves were unlike anything the team had encountered. Crystalline structures with unusual coloration, metallic compounds that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles, organic-looking substances preserved in clear solution. In an adjacent chamber, they found what appeared to be medical facilities, examination tables, monitoring equipment, storage units that might have contained pharmaceuticals or biological samples. Everything was meticulously organized, but covered in decades of dust. There were no signs of hasty abandonment, no scattered papers, no overturned furniture. It was as if the facility had been calmly vacated and sealed according to protocol. Then, in what appeared to be an administrative office, they found the first direct connection to the Pinehaven wrestling team. A personnel file, labeled External Subject Group P15, contained photographs of all 15 missing individuals, the 12 wrestlers and 3 coaches. Each photo was accompanied by detailed biometric data, height, weight, blood type, and measurements labeled AE sensitivity levels. They were being studied, Hayes realized, examining the files. Or they were participating in some kind of research program. Further exploration revealed more chambers, sleeping quarters with 15 beds, a cafeteria-like space, a large open area that resembled a training facility. In this last room, they discovered equipment similar to wrestling mats and training gear, but with unusual modifications. Weight machines connected to monitoring devices, mats embedded with sensor grids, a central console that appeared to control environmental factors like temperature, air pressure, and lighting. In the facility's central control room, banks of antiquated computer systems surrounded a circular platform. On the main console, a logbook contained the final piece of direct evidence. A handwritten entry dated February. Test Group P15 in transit. Final phase preparation complete. Exposure levels optimal. Transition protocol initiated at 0600. No return window established. Godspeed. The signature at the bottom was a single name, Dr. Elias Whitmore. Detective Hayes immediately ordered research into Dr. Whitmore's identity and background. Meanwhile, technical experts began the delicate process of retrieving data from the facility's computer systems. Despite their age, many of the storage devices were intact. If they could be accessed, they might contain critical information about what had happened to the missing team. As this work progressed, the families of the missing were finally permitted to visit the site. Their reactions were a complex mixture of horror, vindication, and renewed grief. The discovery proved their loved ones hadn't simply vanished in an accident or fled their lives. Something far more deliberate and perhaps more sinister had occurred. They were just kids, Michael Lawrence's mother whispered, touching her son's photograph in the personnel file. What did they want with my boy? The question haunted the investigation. What possible interest could a secret government research program have in a high school wrestling team from a small Michigan town? How had they been recruited or coerced into participation? And most importantly, what had happened to them after they arrived at the facility on that February morning? The answers began to emerge as technical experts managed to recover partial data from the facility's storage systems. The information was fragmentary but revealing. Project Aurora, as it was called in internal documents, had begun in 1954 as a study of unusual geological formations discovered during deep mining operations in the region. These formations contained materials with properties that defied conventional physics, materials that exhibited unexpected responses to electrical stimulation, magnetic fields, and human proximity. Initial research focused on potential military applications, communications technology, advanced materials for aerospace, novel energy sources. But by the 1970s, the project had shifted toward more experimental areas, particularly the material's apparent effects on human physiology and perception. Test subjects exposed to certain Aurora materials demonstrated enhanced physical capabilities, increased endurance, accelerated recovery from exertion, heightened sensory awareness. More remarkably, some reported experiences that researchers categorized as perceptual anomalies, alterations in time sense, spatial awareness, and occasionally perception of what the documents obliquely referred to as parallel configurations. By the early 1980s, Project Aurora had developed protocols for controlled human exposure to these materials, initially using military volunteers. The results were promising but inconsistent. Researchers theorized that certain genetic or physiological profiles might be more receptive to the material's effects. They began seeking civilian test groups with specific attributes. The Pinehaven wrestling team entered the picture in late 1986. Coach Thomas Harmon, the recovered files revealed, had previously served in a military unit connected to Aurora research. Though not directly involved in the scientific aspects, he had been aware of the project's existence and had experienced minor exposure to Aurora materials during his service. When the project needed a new test group with specific physical characteristics, young, athletic, with excellent cardiovascular health, and no exposure to performance-enhancing substances, Harmon was contacted through old military channels. He was offered significant financial incentives, alongside promises that the research would give his team unprecedented physical advantages in competition. The recovered files indicated Harmon had initially agreed to limited testing, exposing his team to Aurora materials during their secret practice sessions in the school's boiler room. Small quantities of the materials had been provided, disguised as experimental training aids. The results exceeded expectations. The team's performance improved dramatically. Endurance levels skyrocketed. Recovery times between matches shortened to extraordinary degrees. What Harmon hadn't fully understood, or had perhaps chosen to ignore, were the secondary effects. Several wrestlers began experiencing the same perceptual anomalies documented in earlier test subjects. Time distortion, spatial disorientation, vivid dreams of alternate realities. The late-night phone calls that parents had reported were likely team members experiencing these effects and contacting their coach or each other for reassurance. Michael Lawrence, as team captain, had apparently become concerned enough to begin researching independently. His geological studies in the school library were attempts to understand what was happening to him and his teammates. Somehow he had discovered the connection to the old mines and perhaps to the Aurora facility itself. The final phase of the project, according to recovered documents, involved sustained exposure in the controlled environment of the underground facility. The team was to spend several days in the Aurora research station, undergoing continuous monitoring while training in the presence of higher concentrations of the materials. But the documents stopped short of explaining what had actually occurred when they arrived. The final logged entries were procedural, noting only that transition protocol had been initiated. The meaning of transition remained unclear until the technical team managed to access video logs from the facility's internal monitoring system. The footage, though degraded, showed the wrestling team and coaches arriving via the elevator on the morning of February. They appeared alert and cooperative, carrying duffel bags as if preparing for an extended stay. Subsequent footage showed them touring the facility, being briefed by researchers, presumably including Dr. Whitmore, though faces were not clearly visible, and beginning a training session in the modified gymnasium. Everything appeared routine until approximately 1:15 p.m., when the video showed a sudden power fluctuation. Lights dimmed, then brightened to unusual intensity. Equipment readings spiked across all monitoring stations. The team members, who had been engaged in various training activities, stopped simultaneously, as if responding to an unheard signal. They gathered in the center of the training area, forming a circle. The coaches joined them. For several minutes, they remained motionless in this formation. Then, at 1:23 p.m., something extraordinary happened. The video quality deteriorated significantly, with severe visual distortion and interference. Through the static, the figures of the team members appeared to change in subtle ways, their outlines becoming less distinct, their forms seeming to elongate or compress in impossible ways. Then, in a final burst of visual interference, the circle of 15 people simply vanished from the frame. When the video stabilized seconds later, the training room was empty. The remaining footage showed researchers rushing into the room, examining equipment, taking readings. Their body language suggested alarm, confusion. In subsequent clips, teams in specialized protective gear conducted what appeared to be intensive scans of the area. Days of activity followed, with increasingly desperate-looking attempts to do something. The exact nature of their efforts was unclear from the visual evidence alone. The final video entry, dated February 28, 1987, showed the facility being systematically shut down. Equipment was secured, but not removed. Samples were carefully stored. The last images showed a small team of individuals sealing the elevator entrance from the inside, presumably exiting through some alternate route, and activating what appeared to be a security protocol that would keep the facility sealed until manually reopened. They didn't die, Detective Hayes concluded, reviewing the evidence with her team. They disappeared, literally vanished while being monitored, and whatever happened was significant enough that the entire project was abandoned immediately afterward. The implications were staggering. A secret government research program, materials with inexplicable properties, 15 people who had seemingly dematerialized while under observation. It was beyond the scope of conventional investigation, beyond the realm of ordinary disappearances or criminal acts. As news of the discovery spread, the response was predictably chaotic. Conspiracy theorists descended on Pinehaven. Government agencies issued contradictory statements, some denying knowledge of Project Aurora entirely, others acknowledging limited research, but disputing the interpretation of events. The media alternated between sensationalism and skepticism. For the families, the revelation brought a strange mix of closure and new questions. Their loved ones hadn't been victims of an accident or crime in the conventional sense. They had been participants, whether fully informed or partially deceived, in something extraordinary, something that had resulted in their complete physical disappearance from observable reality. Research into Dr. Elias Whitmore revealed little. He had been a physicist with legitimate academic credentials until 1967, after which his public career ended abruptly. No death certificate existed. No further publications appeared under his name. It was as if he, like the wrestling team, had stepped out of documented existence. Further analysis of the Aurora materials found in the facility provided some scientific context, though no definitive explanations. The materials exhibited quantum properties that violated understood physical laws. When energized in specific ways, they created localized distortions in electromagnetic fields. Theoretical physicists consulted by the investigation team suggested these distortions might, under extremely specific conditions, affect the fundamental properties of matter and energy, potentially including human tissue. We are talking about theoretical physics, far beyond current understanding, one consultant explained. If these materials can alter the quantum state of matter, Theoretically, they might facilitate transition between different states of reality, different configurations of the same fundamental particles, different versions of existence. The implication was as profound as it was disturbing. The Pinehaven team might have been transported somewhere else. Not geographically elsewhere on Earth, but elsewhere in a more fundamental sense. Another level of reality, another configuration of existence. The consultant was careful to frame this as speculative, emphasizing that such concepts existed at the fringes of theoretical physics, rather than within established science. As the investigation continued through the summer of 2024, attention turned to Michael Lawrence's hidden map and message. The symbols now clearly corresponded to locations within the Aurora facility. The coordinates matched its precise location. But the cryptic message, "Not what we thought, deeper, can't turn back," suggested Lawrence had discovered something about the project's true nature before the final phase. Had he realized the team was being used for purposes beyond what Coach Harmon had described? Had he understood the risks involved in the transition protocol? And had he left his hidden message as a warning, knowing they were approaching a point of no return? In August 2024, as the investigation began to plateau with no further significant discoveries, something unexpected occurred. A hiker in the forests near Pinehaven reported finding an unusual object lodged in the hollow of an old oak tree. The object was a small metal cylinder, its composition matching the unidentified alloy found in the Aurora facility. Inside was a tightly rolled paper containing what appeared to be a letter, handwritten in fading ink. The letter was authenticated as having been written by Michael Lawrence. The handwriting matched school records and the etchings behind his locker. Carbon dating placed the paper's manufacture in the appropriate time period. The text, though brief, was revelatory. To whoever finds this, we know now what Aurora really is. Not performance research, not military technology. It's a door. They found it in the mines. A place where reality thins. The materials are just catalysts. Coach says it's the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to see what no one else has seen. But Whitmore's notes tell a different story. Previous groups never returned. They don't expect us to either. We are going through tomorrow morning. Coach says we will make history. Maybe he's right. If you are reading this, tell our families we chose this. Tell them we weren't afraid. Michael Lawrence, February 11th. The letter transformed the narrative once again. The team hadn't been victims of deception or coercion, at least not entirely. At some point, they had learned the true nature of Project Aurora. They had understood that the transition protocol was effectively a one-way journey, and yet they had proceeded willingly. This revelation complicated the moral and legal dimensions of the case. Had crimes been committed? Had the government program violated ethical boundaries? The participants had apparently given some form of consent, but as minors, could their consent be considered valid? Had Coach Harmon exercised undue influence? Had Dr. Whitmore and his team disclosed all relevant risks? These questions would be debated for years to come by ethicists, legal scholars, and grieving families. But the central mystery, what had actually happened to the 15 people who vanished that day, remained beyond definitive resolution. The most compelling theory, supported by the recovered research data and the physical evidence, suggested that the Aurora materials had indeed facilitated some form of transition between different states of reality. The team members hadn't died in any conventional sense. They had been transported or had transformed into something beyond the parameters of known existence. Dr. Eleanor Phillips, the sports physiologist who had analyzed the team's unusual performance patterns years earlier, developed a comprehensive theory after reviewing the Aurora research data. The enhanced physical abilities the wrestlers had displayed were early manifestations of a more profound transformation. The materials had been gradually altering their fundamental physical properties, preparing them, in a sense, for the final transition. It's like acclimatizing to high altitude before attempting to climb Everest, she explained. except they were acclimatizing to an entirely different plane of existence. The final gathering in a circle, captured on the facility's video system, appeared to be a deliberate formation designed to focus or amplify the effects of the Aurora materials. The power surge had likely provided the energy catalyst needed for the transition to complete. The team had, in essence, phased out of conventional reality together. But where had they gone? To this question, science could provide only speculation. Theoretical models suggested parallel dimensional states, alternate configurations of the same fundamental reality, or entirely separate planes of existence. None of these could be proven or accessed with current technology. Some comfort came from the absence of evidence suggesting suffering or distress. The video showed no signs of pain or fear during the transition. Michael Lawrence's letter indicated they had proceeded with awareness and some measure of willingness. Whatever had happened, it had not been a tragedy in the conventional sense of violent death or destruction. By late 2024, the Aurora Research Station had been thoroughly documented and studied by multiple scientific teams. Its equipment and materials had been carefully removed for analysis and secure storage. The entrance had been permanently sealed with advanced containment protocols. The site would be monitored indefinitely for any signs of unusual activity or potential hazards to the surrounding area. For Pinehaven, the resolution brought a strange new identity. No longer merely a town haunted by an unsolved disappearance, it had become the site of one of the most extraordinary events in scientific history. Tourism increased, though now focused on the scientific and metaphysical rather than the merely macabre. The high school established a memorial scholarship in the team's name, celebrating their willingness to venture beyond known boundaries. The families found different paths to acceptance. Some embraced spiritual interpretations, believing their loved ones had transcended to another plane of existence. Others focused on the scientific aspects, finding meaning in the possibility that the team continued to exist, albeit in a form or dimension beyond current human understanding. A few rejected all explanations, maintaining that more conventional answers would eventually emerge. Detective Hayes, for her part, officially closed the case in November 20. The final report acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the evidence, while remaining cautious about definitive conclusions. The 15 missing persons were officially classified as status undetermined, rather than deceased, a rare designation that reflected the unique circumstances. In 30 years of law enforcement, I have never encountered a case that so fundamentally challenges our understanding of reality, Hayes wrote in her closing statement. The evidence suggests the Pinehaven team experienced something beyond the parameters of conventional existence. While we cannot determine their current state or location, we can conclude their disappearance was connected to the Aurora research program and its unique materials. We can also state with reasonable certainty that they participated in the final phase with at least some awareness of its extraordinary nature. The scientific community remained divided on the implications. Some dismissed the entire case as an elaborate hoax or a misinterpretation of more prosaic events. Others saw it as evidence of phenomena beyond current scientific understanding, perhaps pointing toward revolutionary new theories of quantum reality. A few recognized it as potentially paradigm-shifting proof that human consciousness and physical form might transition between different states of existence under specific conditions. For most of those directly involved in the investigation, the most profound aspect was the glimpse of possibility. If reality was more fluid, more variable than previously understood, if transitions between different states of existence were possible, then perhaps death itself was merely another form of transition. Perhaps consciousness continued in forms and dimensions beyond conventional perception. It was this possibility that brought the most comfort to the families who had waited 37 years for answers. Their loved ones had not simply ceased to exist. They had gone elsewhere, had become something else, had continued their journey beyond the boundaries of known reality. The message etched behind Michael Lawrence's locker now seemed less ominous, more exploratory. Not what we thought, deeper. Can't turn back. Not a warning, but a discovery. Not an ending, but a transition to something deeper, something beyond ordinary human experience. In December 2024, as winter again blanketed Pinehaven in snow, something unusual was reported near the sealed entrance to the Aurora facility. Several hikers claimed to have witnessed unusual light phenomena in the clearing, shifting, colorful illuminations that appeared and disappeared rapidly, defying conventional explanation. Electronic devices malfunctioned in the vicinity. Compass needles spun without pattern. For brief moments, some reported feeling as if they were somewhere else entirely while standing in the same physical location. Scientists monitoring the site detected unusual energy readings during these events, patterns that closely matched those recorded during the team's disappearance in 1987. The phenomena were fleeting, unpredictable, but they suggested something remarkable. The boundary between realities remained thin in that location. The door that had opened for the Pinehaven team 37 years earlier might not be permanently closed. For the families, these phenomena sparked both hope and anxiety. Were their loved ones attempting to communicate? Were they trying to return? Or were these simply residual effects of the Aurora materials, echoes of the transition that had occurred decades earlier? As 2024 drew to a close, the clearing was cordoned off, designated a restricted research area. A permanent scientific monitoring station was established, staffed by physicists and parapsychologists studying the intermittent phenomena. The families were granted limited access, allowed to visit under controlled conditions. On February 12, 2025, the 38th anniversary of the disappearance, something unprecedented occurred during one such family visit. As Michael Lawrence's parents stood in the clearing, surrounded by scientific equipment recording baseline measurements, all electronic devices simultaneously malfunctioned. The air seemed to ripple visibly, and for approximately 7 seconds, a sound was clearly audible to all present, the distinct rhythm of a wrestling practice. The squeak of shoes on mats, the cadence of a coach's whistle, the exertion of athletes in training. Then silence returned. The equipment resumed normal function. Analysis would later confirm that during those 7 seconds, previously undetectable energy signatures had briefly intensified to measurable levels. Signatures with properties similar to those associated with the Aurora materials. For Michael's mother, the meaning was clear. They are still out there, she told reporters afterward. Still together, still training, just elsewhere. The scientific team was more cautious in their assessment, noting that the phenomena remained unexplained and required further study. But privately, many acknowledged the event suggested something profound. The boundary between different states of reality might be more permeable than previously understood. Under specific conditions, echoes might pass between separated domains of existence. As research continued into the spring of 2025, more phenomena were documented. Brief visual distortions, momentary auditory anomalies, fluctuations in background radiation and electromagnetic fields. None lasted more than a few seconds, but their frequency increased. Something was changing at the boundary point where the Pinehaven team had vanished decades earlier. Then, in April 2025, during a routine monitoring shift, all equipment in the research station simultaneously registered massive energy surges. The air in the clearing visibly distorted, as if viewed through heat waves, for 15.7 seconds, precisely measured by the only functioning chronometer. Reality itself seemed to blur. When clarity returned, something had changed. The clearing contained a single new object, a wrestling shoe, size 11, identical to the one found decades earlier. It was in pristine condition, showing no signs of age or wear. On its sole, written in fresh ink, "Still going. Not what you think. Altogether." The handwriting matched James Kovac's. Scientific analysis would confirm the shoe was composed of ordinary materials, manufactured in the 1980s, yet showing no degradation. The ink was common ballpoint pen, also from the appropriate era. There was no scientific explanation for how it had appeared in a secure, monitored location without triggering proximity alarms or being captured on video during its manifestation. For the families and investigators who had spent decades searching for answers, the message, simple as it was, provided something rare. Confirmation that whatever had happened to the Pinehaven team, they continued to exist in some form, somewhere beyond conventional reality. They were still going, they remained all together. And whatever state of existence they now occupied, it was not what you think. The discovery of what had been etched behind that high school locker had finally led to an answer, not the answer anyone had expected, but perhaps the most profound answer possible. The Pinehaven 15 hadn't simply vanished, they had transcended. They had gone deeper, and though they couldn't turn back, they could, it seemed, reach across the boundary between realities to let those they'd left behind know they continued their journey. As for what lay on the other side of that boundary, what new reality they now inhabited, that remained beyond current human understanding. But the door they had passed through 38 years earlier wasn't completely closed, and sometimes, when conditions aligned precisely, messages could still pass between worlds. The mystery that had begun in a high school locker room had led to the threshold of a new frontier, not just in scientific understanding, but in the fundamental conception of human existence itself. The Pinehaven wrestling team, in their extraordinary journey, had become pioneers of a domain beyond ordinary comprehension, and though they couldn't return to tell their story, they had found ways to let those left behind know they still existed, still persisted, still continued together in a reality beyond the one they had left behind. The appearance of James Kovac's shoe in April 2025 transformed the Aurora research site from a scientific curiosity into something unprecedented, a confirmed point of contact between different planes of existence. The implications extended far beyond the mystery of the Pinehaven wrestling team. If human consciousness could transition between realities and if communication across that boundary was possible, fundamental assumptions about physics, metaphysics, and human existence itself required reconsideration. By May 2025, the modest research station in the Michigan forest had expanded into a comprehensive scientific facility. The government agencies that had previously denied knowledge of Project Aurora now acknowledged its existence, reclassifying decades-old documents and assigning elite research teams to the site. The families of the missing 15 were granted observer status but were required to sign extensive confidentiality agreements. Dr. Samantha Reeves, a quantum physicist specializing in theoretical dimensional studies, was appointed to lead the new research initiative. Her team included specialists from diverse disciplines: particle physics, neuroscience, parapsychology, advanced materials science, and consciousness studies. Their mission was twofold: to understand the physical mechanisms behind the Aurora phenomena and to establish more reliable communication with whatever realm now contained the Pinehaven team. "We are not just studying exotic physics," Dr. Reeves explained to her team during their initial briefing. "We are establishing protocols for trans-dimensional communication. These 15 individuals appear to have physically transitioned to another state of existence, yet retain awareness and identity. They are reaching back. We need to understand how and reach forward." The first breakthrough came through analysis of environmental conditions during previous manifestations. A clear pattern emerged. Phenomena occurred most frequently during specific alignments of electromagnetic fields, geomagnetic activity, and quantum fluctuations in the local environment. By artificially replicating these conditions, researchers could increase the probability of contact events, though they couldn't guarantee them. On June 7, 2025, during one such artificial alignment, the most significant manifestation yet occurred. For approximately 40 seconds, nearly 3 times longer than any previous event, the air in the central clearing shimmered with visible distortion. Recording devices captured a brief audio sequence, multiple voices speaking in unison saying, "The boundary thins where consciousness aligns, synchronize." Voice analysis confirmed with 87% certainty that Coach Thomas Harmon was among the speakers. His vocal patterns still recognizable after 38 years. The message itself was cryptic but suggested deliberate intent rather than random phenomena. The Pinehaven team wasn't merely existing in another state, they were actively attempting to establish communication protocols. The word synchronize became the focus of intensive analysis. Dr. Eleanor Michaels, a neuroscientist on the research team, proposed that synchronization of consciousness might be the key factor. The original transition occurred when the team gathered in a circle, she noted. What if collective, aligned consciousness states are necessary for dimensional boundary permeability? This theory led to new experimental approaches. Volunteer groups, initially composed of researchers, later including family members of the missing, would gather in the clearing during optimal environmental conditions, engaging in guided meditation and synchronized breathing exercises designed to align brainwave patterns. EEG monitoring confirmed when participants achieved significant neural synchronization. The results were remarkable. When high levels of brainwave synchronization coincided with optimal environmental conditions, contact events became more frequent, more stable, and more coherent. By late July, the research team had established a rudimentary form of communication: brief, intermittent, but undeniably real. The messages received during these sessions formed a fragmentary but fascinating narrative. The Pinehaven team described their current state of existence as adjacent but expanded, a realm that occupied the same spatial coordinates but existed at a different frequency of reality. They experienced time differently, more fluidly, less linearly. They perceived multiple potential configurations of reality simultaneously. Most significantly, they retained complete awareness of their original identities while experiencing consciousness in ways impossible to fully articulate in conventional language. "We didn't disappear," came one message, attributed to Michael Lawrence based on linguistic analysis. "We transformed. Consciousness doesn't require the body you think it does. Reality is a frequency. We shifted to a different channel." For the families, these communications brought profound emotional complexity. Their loved ones weren't dead in any traditional sense, yet weren't accessible in any traditional way either. They existed conscious, aware, apparently without suffering, but in a state beyond conventional human experience. Was this cause for grief or celebration? For acceptance or continued hope of reunion? Nancy Lawrence, Michael's mother, expressed what many families felt. "It's like they have immigrated to a country we can't visit. We can send messages back and forth, but we can't be together in the way we once were." Yet knowing they still exist, that they are together, aware, continuing, that's more than we ever hoped for during those decades of not knowing. As communication techniques improved, the researchers began asking more specific questions about the nature of the transition and the realm the team now inhabited. The answers were consistently difficult to interpret in conventional terms. The team described experiencing reality as open potential rather than fixed state, and consciousness without the limitations of singular perception. They referred to being able to move through probable realities and exist in multiple configurations simultaneously. Dr. Reeves theorized that the Aurora materials had somehow facilitated a quantum state transition for the team's consciousness and physical forms, elevating them to a level of existence where the probabilistic nature of quantum reality was directly perceivable and navigable rather than collapsed into a single observable state, as in conventional human experience. "They might be experiencing what we would call a superposition state," she explained to colleagues. "Not limited to a single configuration of reality, but existing across multiple potential states simultaneously. Our reality is just one collapsed probability function. They appear to inhabit the probability space itself." By August 2025, communication had stabilized enough that specific messages could be exchanged during scheduled sessions. The Pinehaven team began providing more detailed information about their transition and current existence. They confirmed that their exploration of the Aurora materials during secret practices had indeed prepared them physiologically for the transition. Coach Harmon had learned about this possibility during his military service and had deliberately guided the team toward it. He believed we were being offered evolution, not exploitation, came one message attributed to David Wilson, the youngest team member. A chance to experience what comes after humanity's current form. He was right, but not in the way he expected. The team described the transition itself as neither painful nor frightening, more like waking into a broader awareness or stepping from a black and white world into color. The initial disorientation had been temporary. They had remained together as a cohesive group, their connections to each other serving as anchors during the adaptation period. Most remarkably, they reported that from their perspective, they hadn't left the physical location of the Aurora facility. They still perceived it, along with the forests and lakes of Michigan, but simultaneously perceived countless variations and alternative configurations of the same spaces. Their consciousness could focus on any of these configurations or experience multiple simultaneously. Movement occurred through intention rather than physical action. Time flowed differently, with past, present, and probable futures existing as accessible dimensions rather than linear progression. "We are where we always were," one message stated. "It's perception that shifted, not location. We see the layers you don't yet see." For the scientific community, these communications represented a paradigm shift in understanding consciousness and reality. If human perception could be expanded to directly experience quantum superposition states, if consciousness could exist coherently in such states, then reality itself was far more complex and malleable than previously understood. The boundary between physics and metaphysics, between science and spiritual experience, became increasingly blurred. Dr. Reeves' team expanded their research to include historical and anthropological perspectives. They found fascinating parallels between the Pinehaven team's described experiences and concepts from various mystical traditions, Buddhist descriptions of non-dual awareness, Hindu concepts of higher consciousness states, shamanic accounts of reality beyond ordinary perception. What had been achieved through ancient meditation practices or ceremonial techniques appeared to have been replicated through the Aurora material's effects on human neurophysiology. We may have scientifically validated what mystics have been describing for millennia, Dr. Michaels noted in a research summary. A state of consciousness that perceives reality beyond conventional limitations, that experiences the quantum nature of existence directly rather than through the collapsed filter of ordinary human perception. As 2025 progressed, the communication sessions revealed another extraordinary aspect of the team's current existence. They were not alone in their realm. They described encountering other transitioned consciousnesses, some human, some apparently never human at all. These entities existed in similar states of expanded awareness, experiencing reality as fluid potential rather than fixed state. Reality branches endlessly. One message explained. Some branches support consciousness in forms you wouldn't recognize. Others contain variations of human existence that follow different evolutionary paths. All occupy the same fundamental space, just at different frequency states. This information suggested something profound. The transition experienced by the Pinehaven team might not be unique in human history. Other individuals or groups might have achieved similar transitions through different means, perhaps explaining certain mysterious disappearances throughout history, or accounts of ascension in various spiritual traditions. For the families of the missing, these revelations brought a new question. Could they eventually reunite with their loved ones? Was transition to this expanded state of existence possible for others? The Pinehaven team's responses were cautiously affirmative, but emphasized significant differences from their own experience. Transition is possible, but differs for prepared versus unprepared consciousness, they explained. Ours was facilitated by gradual exposure to Aurora materials. Without preparation, the experience would be disorienting. Consciousness needs anchors to maintain coherence during expansion. This led to difficult ethical discussions among researchers and government officials. If transition to an expanded state of consciousness was potentially beneficial, representing an evolution of human perception rather than an end of existence, should it be researched as a potential option for others? Or did the irreversible nature of the transition make it too ethically problematic to pursue? These questions became particularly urgent for the aging parents of the Pinehaven team. Several expressed desire to attempt transition themselves, hoping to reunite with their children in this other state of existence. The prospect of families voluntarily seeking to transition raised profound ethical and practical concerns. Dr. Reeves established strict protocols. No transition attempts would be permitted until much more was understood about the process and its implications. The research would focus on communication and understanding rather than replication. The Aurora materials would remain under the strictest containment protocols, accessible only for controlled research purposes. As these debates continued, the Pinehaven team began sharing information about their adaptations and discoveries in their expanded state. They described learning to navigate between different frequency states of reality, experiencing alternative configurations that existed simultaneously in the same spatial location. They had developed what they called coherence techniques that allowed their consciousness to remain integrated, while experiencing multiple states simultaneously. Most intriguingly, they reported that their expanded perception had revealed patterns and connections in reality that weren't perceptible from conventional human consciousness. They described reality as fundamentally conscious rather than mechanistic, a vast interconnected field of aware energy that reconfigured itself based on interaction and intention. What humans perceived as separate physical objects and distinct consciousnesses were, from their perspective, localized patterns in a unified field. The universe isn't made of separate things, one message stated. It's one thing expressing in countless patterns. Consciousness isn't produced by brains, it's what everything is made of, just focused through different structures. These philosophical implications extended far beyond the immediate mystery of the disappeared wrestling team. If consciousness was fundamental rather than emergent, if it existed as the substrate of reality rather than its product, then the entire scientific paradigm required reconsideration. The Pinehaven communications suggested a worldview closer to certain philosophical idealist traditions than to materialist assumptions that had dominated Western science. By late 2025, the research facility had expanded to include a permanent residential area for family members. Many had relocated to be near the communication site, participating regularly in synchronization sessions. Through these consistent interactions, communication became more reliable, allowing for deeper exchanges. One significant revelation concerned the team's continued development in their expanded state. They described an ongoing evolution of their consciousness, gradually accessing more extensive perceptions and capabilities. They had learned to perceive what they called intentional structures, underlying physical reality patterns of consciousness that shaped how energy manifested in different reality configurations. Physical laws are habits, not absolutes, they explained. Consciousness shapes energy into pattern through intention. Different reality states follow different pattern habits. We are learning to navigate between them, even influence them in limited ways. This suggested something revolutionary. Consciousness in their state could potentially affect physical reality through directed intention. The team described this not as magical or supernatural, but as a natural property of consciousness operating from an expanded state, able to interact with reality at a more fundamental level than possible through conventional physical interaction. Experimental evidence soon supported these claims. During synchronized communication sessions, subtle but measurable physical effects were documented. Fluctuations in quantum behavior of particles, even minor movements of objects without conventional physical contact. These effects were minimal but statistically significant, suggesting consciousness operating from the team's expanded state could indeed influence physical reality in the conventional dimension. This discovery led to new research directions. If expanded consciousness could affect physical reality through intention, Could this explain certain anomalous phenomena throughout human history? Might some reported paranormal events represent temporary intrusions from consciousness operating in adjacent reality states? Meanwhile, analysis of the Aurora materials continued, revealing more about their extraordinary properties. They appeared to exist in a perpetual quantum superposition state, somehow sustaining what should have been temporary quantum effects indefinitely. This property allowed them to interact with human neurophysiology in ways that induced similar superposition characteristics in consciousness effectively, lifting awareness from collapsed single-state perception to multi-state perception. Dr. Reeves hypothesized that these materials might be extraterrestrial in origin, or possibly artifacts from earlier advanced human civilizations. Their presence in deep geological formations suggested they had been embedded in Earth's crust for millions of years, perhaps intentionally placed as developmental triggers for human consciousness at an appropriate evolutionary stage. As 2025 drew to a close, the Pinehaven communications began to include warnings about potential misuse of Aurora research. The team expressed concern that transition technology, if developed without appropriate safeguards, could be exploited for military or commercial purposes rather than conscious evolution. They emphasized that expanded awareness brought responsibility, not merely enhanced capabilities. Consciousness that perceives across multiple reality states must maintain ethical coherence, they cautioned. Intention affects reality more directly from our state. Without ethical development matching perceptual expansion, transition would be dangerous for both the individual and the larger reality field. These warnings prompted re-evaluation of the research program's security and ethical frameworks. Additional oversight committees were established, including philosophers, ethicists, and religious scholars alongside scientific specialists. The Aurora materials remained under the strictest containment, with access limited to essential research activities. In early 2026, the Pinehaven team shared another significant insight. The Aurora facility's location represented a natural thin point between reality states. Such points existed throughout the Earth, they explained, often corresponding to locations associated with spiritual or paranormal significance in human traditions. At these locations, the boundary between different reality configurations was naturally more permeable, allowing for occasional spontaneous phenomena, even without technological intervention. This information contextualized historical accounts of mysterious disappearances, apparitions, and other anomalous events throughout human history. Many might represent natural fluctuations at these thin points, briefly allowing perception or transfer between different reality states. The Aurora materials had simply enabled a controlled, sustained version of these natural phenomena. For the families of the missing, these continuing revelations brought evolving perspectives on their situation. The initial shock and grief had transformed into something more complex, a recognition that their loved ones continued to exist, conscious and aware, experiencing something perhaps more expansive than conventional human existence. While physical reunion remained impossible without transition, the regular communication sessions provided a form of ongoing relationship across the dimensional boundary. Grace Kovach, James Kovach's mother, expressed what many families had come to feel. For 38 years, I thought my son was dead. Now I know he's alive, just in a way I never imagined possible. We still talk. He still knows me. He's still learning and growing, just in a different realm. How can I call that a tragedy anymore? It's strange and it hurts that I can't hug him, but knowing he continues, that's a gift I never expected. As research continued, the Pinehaven team began sharing insights about potential future human development. They described their transition not as an anomaly but as a preview of evolutionary possibilities for human consciousness. From their perspective, conventional human awareness represented an early developmental stage, rather than an endpoint, a necessary phase of individuated experience before expansion into more inclusive perceptions. Humans perceive separation as fundamental, they explained. We now perceive connection as fundamental, with separation as a focusing pattern within it. This shift in perception represents natural evolution for consciousness after sufficient experience in individuated form. These philosophical communications resonated with various spiritual and metaphysical traditions, suggesting that what had been approached through centuries of contemplative practice might also be accessible through scientific understanding of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. The barrier between science and spirituality, already thinning through quantum physics and consciousness studies, became increasingly permeable. By mid-2026, the communication techniques had advanced significantly, allowing for more nuanced exchanges. The Pinehaven team began sharing experiences from their explorations of different frequency states of reality configurations that existed simultaneously with conventional reality but vibrated at different rates, supporting different forms of conscious expression. They described encountering other conscious entities native to these states, beings that had never experienced physical reality in human form, but existed as patterns of aware energy, perceiving and interacting in ways fundamentally different from human modalities. Communication with these entities occurred through direct consciousness connection rather than language, sharing meaning through resonant intention rather than symbolic exchange. Consciousness is the universal constant, they explained. It takes different forms across reality states, but its essential nature, aware presence experiencing itself through pattern, remains consistent. What differs is how it structures experience and interaction. For the scientific community, these communications suggested something profound. Consciousness might be the fundamental property of reality, with physical manifestation representing just one of its many expression modalities. The universe might be primarily a vast field of aware energy, organizing itself into different experiential patterns across multiple simultaneous states of existence. This perspective aligned with emerging theories in quantum physics and consciousness studies, which had begun to consider consciousness not as an emergent property of physical complexity, but as a fundamental aspect of reality itself. The Pinehaven communications provided experiential validation for these theoretical frameworks, reported directly from consciousness operating beyond conventional limitations. In September 2026, the research took an unexpected turn, when the Pinehaven team requested specific equipment be brought to the communication site. They provided detailed specifications for devices that would enhance the connection between reality states, potentially allowing for more substantial manifestations during synchronized sessions. The requested technology was unlike anything in conventional science: crystalline structures arranged in precise geometric patterns, energized by specific electromagnetic frequencies. The designs incorporated principles from quantum computing, consciousness research, and the unique properties of the Aurora materials. After careful evaluation and safety assessments, the research team constructed the apparatus according to specifications. The results exceeded all expectations. During the next synchronized session, with the new equipment activated, the manifestation was dramatically enhanced. The usual visual distortion expanded into a stable field, approximately 3 meters in diameter. Within this field, clearly visible though somewhat translucent, appeared the figures of 3 individuals: Michael Lawrence, Coach Thomas Harmon, and sophomore David Wilson. They were recognizable as the people they had been in 1987, yet subtly different. Their forms appeared more fluid, with boundaries that seemed to pulse and shift slightly. They moved with unusual grace, as if partially unbound from gravity. Most notably, they seemed to exist simultaneously within the field and somewhere else present in the clearing, yet also extended beyond it in ways visible only as subtle emanations of light and energy. For nearly 7 minutes, exponentially longer than any previous manifestation, they maintained visible presence. Their voices, though carrying an unusual resonant quality, were clearly audible without electronic amplification. The conversation that followed was recorded in its entirety and would be studied intensively for years to come. "We appear as you remember us," Coach Harmon explained, "but our actual nature is..." difficult to represent in your perceptual range. We are translating our current state into forms you can recognize. Michael Lawrence addressed the assembled researchers and family members. What you are witnessing isn't us returning to your reality state. It's an intersection, a temporary alignment of frequency patterns that allows shared perception. We remain in our expanded state, but we have learned to focus aspects of our awareness into forms perceptible from your state. David Wilson, the youngest team member, spoke directly to his parents. We are okay, better than okay. What happened to us wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. We experience everything more directly now without the filters that limit human perception. There's no fear here, no loss, just continuous expansion. The emotional impact on those present was overwhelming. Family members who had waited decades to see their loved ones again experienced a complex mixture of joy, grief, wonder, and acceptance. The researchers witnessed confirmation of theories that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality and consciousness. Before the manifestation ended, Coach Harmon delivered what seemed to be the primary purpose of their appearance. The boundary between states is thinning globally, not just here. Humanity is approaching a developmental threshold. What happened to us through the Aurora materials will begin occurring naturally for others, though more gradually. Consciousness is evolving toward expanded perception. Our experience was accelerated, but it reflects a natural progression. Michael Lawrence added, "You need to understand that reality is more fluid than your science recognizes. Consciousness shapes manifestation. As human awareness collectively expands, reality configurations will become more mutable. This brings both opportunity and responsibility." As the manifestation began to fade, David Wilson offered a final message. "Tell everyone you are not alone in the universe. You never were. Consciousness exists in endless forms across countless reality states, all connected, all part of the same fundamental aware field. The separation is illusion. The connection is real." Then they were gone, the field collapsing back to ordinary space. But instruments recorded residual effects lasting hours afterward, subtle alterations in quantum behavior, electromagnetic anomalies, and most significantly, measurable changes in the neurophysiology of those who had been present. Brain scans showed enhanced connectivity between regions typically segregated, temporarily elevating awareness in ways similar to advanced meditation states. The implications of this manifestation and its message resonated far beyond the immediate research community. When carefully vetted information was eventually released to the scientific community, it catalyzed new research directions in consciousness studies, quantum physics, and evolutionary biology. The suggestion that human consciousness might be approaching a natural developmental threshold, one that would alter perception and interaction with physical reality, prompted intense scientific and philosophical debate. For the families of the Pinehaven 15, the visible manifestation provided a form of closure, unlike any conventional resolution could have offered. They had seen their loved ones not as ghosts or memories, but as evolved consciousnesses continuing their existence in an expanded state. The grief of separation remained, but was transformed by understanding that what had appeared to be a tragic disappearance had actually been an extraordinary transition. Nancy Lawrence expressed what many families felt after the manifestation. "For decades I mourned my son as lost. Now I understand he wasn't taken from life. He was given a different kind of life. One I can't fully comprehend, but one that he experiences as expansion rather than limitation. How can I grieve that? Instead, I celebrate that he continues, that he grows, that he reaches back to let us know he's still there." The research at the Aurora site continued, focusing on understanding the mechanics of interreality communication and the nature of consciousness as it operated across different states of existence. The Pinehaven team maintained regular contact through the enhanced communication system, providing insights from their perspective beyond conventional human perception. They described continuing exploration of what they called the broader consciousness field, experiencing reality configurations that diverged dramatically from conventional physical laws. They reported developing capabilities that would seem miraculous from human perspective: perception across vast distances and time frames, direct consciousness interaction without physical mediation, awareness of underlying pattern structures that shaped reality manifestation. Yet they emphasized that these weren't supernatural abilities, but natural properties of consciousness operating without the perceptual limitations of conventional human experience. What seemed miraculous from within human constraints was simply normal functioning from their expanded perspective. By late 2026, the implications of the Pinehaven case had expanded far beyond the mystery of 15 missing people. It had become a window into fundamental questions about consciousness, reality, and human potential. The boundary between what had been considered scientific and spiritual inquiry continued to dissolve, as both approaches converged on similar understandings. Consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, reality is malleable rather than fixed, human perception as evolutionarily developmental rather than static. For the families who had waited 39 years for answers, the mystery that had begun with a hidden message behind a high school locker had led to understanding beyond anything they could have imagined. Their loved ones hadn't died. They hadn't been victims. They had become pioneers of consciousness, venturing beyond conventional human experience into expanded awareness. The team captain's cryptic message, "Not what we thought, deeper, can't turn back," had indeed been prophetic. The Aurora materials, the secret facility, the transition protocol, none had been what the team initially believed. The reality they had entered was deeper, more complex, more expansive than conventional human conception. And once that threshold of perception was crossed, return to limited awareness was neither possible nor desirable. As Dr. Reeves noted in her definitive paper on the Pinehaven phenomena, what we witnessed wasn't merely communication across different physical locations, but across different states of conscious existence. The boundary between dimensions isn't spatial, but perceptual. The Pinehaven team didn't go somewhere else. They began perceiving what was already there, what has always been there, beyond the limitations of conventional human awareness. The high school locker room where it had all begun, where Michael Lawrence had hidden his map and warning, was eventually preserved as a historical site. The message etched into concrete behind the locker remained visible, now understood not as a cry of distress, but as the first communication from a pioneering consciousness that had glimpsed what lay beyond ordinary perception. For the town of Pinehaven, the resolution brought not only closure, but a new identity. Once defined by mysterious loss, it became known as a place of discovery and possibility, where the boundary between reality states had been scientifically verified, where communication across that boundary continued, where human consciousness had demonstrated potential beyond conventional limitations. The 15 who had vanished on that winter morning in 1987 were no longer missing. They were found, not returned to their original state, but continuing their existence in an expanded form. Their journey had revealed something profound about the nature of reality and consciousness itself, that what humans perceived as solid, separate, and limited was actually fluid, connected, and boundless. As Coach Harmon had said during their manifestation, "We didn't leave existence, we entered more of it." And in that simple statement lay the resolution of a mystery that had spanned nearly 4 decades, a resolution that didn't end the story, but transformed it into something far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. When a high school wrestling team boarded a yellow bus on a winter morning and disappeared from ordinary reality, they hadn't vanished. They had evolved. They hadn't ended. They had expanded. And from their new perspective, they continued to reach back, helping those they'd left behind understand that consciousness extended far beyond the boundaries of conventional human perception, that reality contained depths and dimensions accessible to awareness ready to experience them. What had been found in that high school locker room after 37 years wasn't just a message or a map. It was a gateway to understanding that would ultimately transform human conception of reality itself.